Okay, so we are here for another round of language completeness and consistency. We haven't been doing as many live streams recently because we are both rushing to get version 12.1 done, and I'm off working on my big physics project, which hopefully I will start doing live streams about soon. We've been doing what might be called dead streams, recording all kinds of things, but it won't make a lot of sense until the whole project is released. So that will hopefully happen fairly soon. All right, let's go on and start looking at this. We have various topics here. Structured array documentation. You know, I have to say, structured arrays have not had as much of a day in the sun as I might have hoped. Can we explain that?
Well, I think it's been a resource issue that we didn't have somebody working on it, and then he flaked, and you know.
Yeah, but I mean, but do we? I mean, in other words, have structured arrays. By the way, I assume Rob is here, right?
Yes, I'm here.
I mean, structured arrays just haven't. I haven't used them ever.
Well, we only have two at the moment, so that's.
What are they?
The symmetrized array and quantity array.
But quantity array has its own head.
Well, so do all structured arrays. That's why we need to update the documentation.
So this is part of the discussion. So we implemented quantity array in the framework of a structured array, which is there waiting to add many more types of structured arrays. So you wanted to have quantity array to have its own head. And now for 12.2, we are planning to add also data array, which is going to use this framework. So this change is to make these objects to have their own head, following also sparse array.
What do you mean their own head?
Right. So if you look, maybe if you look at some of the examples, then.
But to answer the question.
Right, so quantity array, right, the full form of this used to be structured array of blah, blah, blah with a quantity array inside of it. Now the full form of that is quantity array of, various stuff.
So if I look at this and I say.
Full form.
Yeah. Okay.
Right, and the same thing for symmetrized array. And I mean, we have a few more structured arrays sort of implemented, but they're not fully polished, so we haven't documented them.
So basically, structured array is becoming a subterranean creature. I mean, there's no place where you'd use structured array on its own as a head. Is that correct?
Right, except for legacy compatibility. So if you get one of the old objects in, it will evaluate to the new full form.
Does anybody know what the relationship between these things is and data structures in the compiler? Like particularly symmetrized array, I could see being related.
Well, I think there's really no relationship.
Why?
Because the data structures, I mean, these are things that basically provide alternative representations for lists of things.
Okay.
Now there are some of these data structures, like dynamic array, that provides an alternative representation list, but it has special, this special feature you can add.
Symmetrized array, it sounds like it's a special, feature of a list.
Well, no, it's not a special feature of a list. It's a special representation of a list that happens to be very compact for things with lots of symmetries. Just like sparse array happens to be very compact for things with lots of zeros in them.
Personally, okay, from what you're saying here, what is the point here? What you want to do is to make structured array, what does it currently talk about on the structured array page? Isn't it like selling structured arrays as their own thing? Yes.
Yes.
This is a
Well, that's part of the reason why we made this change, is because it's better to be like sparse array and and stuff and have the.
Well, wait a minute. There was a plan originally to have a whole collection of, van der Mon matrices and God knows what else. So all kinds of different kinds of structured arrays.
Right.
What became of that plan?
Well, the people we've had to work on that have been, we had a person who was working on it and then he left, and then we had another person who became very flaky and basically disappeared for months at a time.
Okay.
So
Story of people. Okay, all right, fine, but that isn't an answer to why we gave up, or are we giving up? Because what you're proposing to do is to give up on the vision of structured array. And that was Roger's vision, so he should probably be the one representing.
It was my vision originally, is having this thing as structured array, and we thought about it. I thought about it. And I thought about some of the input Jose had with quantity array and stuff, and I don't think this changes the vision at all. It just
and maybe you should also open up structured array head queue to.
It just means we might document
it's
tutorial.
Still futurized, but if there's a link right there in structure. Okay.
This is getting very squiggly, in my opinion. No, I don't agree with this. I'm sorry, I just don't agree with this. I think this is in the nature of kind of advisory. Look, this reminds me, by the time you have something like this, okay, that's an internal discovery question. And it's like, is this error message really an important error message, or is it just a warning? It becomes a much more complicated issue.
What do you mean? Right. You need. Right. So structured array is now a token that
what is the role
to
of
refer
this?
generically.
The only role of this is to determine whether normal, structured array will eat this particular thing. Otherwise, you're just looking at head of the thing, and then you look it up in the documentation and you say, is it an example of a structured array? I'm just not. I'm sorry. This really isn't working for me.
I kind of agree with you, Stephen. I think I'm not sure this needs to be a. It needs.
Okay, but then when we document structured array as a token that can refer to all structured arrays, how do you document that?
I don't know what that token is really for. Unless that token.
So maybe you should look at some of the examples.
Oh, I understand. I understand what I do. I was saying that inadvisedly. Okay, I do understand what it's for. As in, it's to deal with the allowed head stuff and the normal stuff and so on. Right? It's to bank switch a bunch of functionality where you don't want to say, oh, I don't want to. The fact is, that you've got a quantity array before you. But
not necessarily. Right? If you're writing a generic code.
What kind of generic code?
Code that accepts arbitrary arrays, and you want to you have code for lists, and then, a generic case for.
Can I ask a question? What feature, these things that are of array type, they accept certain kinds of list operations like part extraction and so on, correct?
Yep, that's correct.
Okay, so this is essentially the statement, I am a structured array, means that I accept what set of operations?
Well, that's somewhat dependent, right? There's a baseline of, part and normal.
Well, what about determinant, for example? If I'm a sparse array, I'll accept determinant. If I'm a symmetrized array, I'll accept determinant, I hope. If I'm a quantity array, I don't know whether I accept determinant.
Well, any structured array, if there isn't a dedicated algorithm for it, will normalize and then evaluate that way. In sort of the thing, in the sort of generic matrixy array operations world.
Well, the answer, Stephen, is basically you can do just about, so things like arithmetic, operations like transpose, matrix operations, things like that work. What you can't use, the one thing you can't use these for, and this is the same for sparse array, is you can't use Sparse array is like a list argument to something like integrate, like, x comma, limits on integrate.
I understand. That's that in a sense we might call it a symbolic wrapper list as opposed to a data list of some kind.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep, that's perfectly reasonable, and that's basically the distinction.
Okay, but so a symmetrized array, I could feed it in with wild abandon to the machine learning functions. True or not true?
Depends on whether they, if they wrote their code properly, yes.
I wonder if QA has tested that. Okay, that we could find that out. But okay, look.
Right. So Stephen, let me tell you what we're trying. So first of all, we need to update the structured array page, period, right?
Because it's becoming vestigial, basically.
Yes.
Well, it's not completely vestigial because we do use it, and I strongly argue that we need to continue to use it.
Well, actually, I argue against. I've argued this time and time again. The thing we want for allowed heads is not to have something like structured array. We want a setting for allowed heads to allow all things of this type of list.
See, I think that the allowed heads thing, I think this is going to be a story, and you attacked my analogy, but I don't think it's a wrong analogy. I think we in our error handling thing, we're going to need this mechanism to say, if it's just a warning, ignore it. Otherwise, abort, for example. Now, somebody's warning is another person's red alert. And I think similarly here, somebody's, it's close enough to being an array that I should just bucket it in with the arrays is okay, and other people it's not.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's going to be a somewhat arbitrary dividing line, and I think the right way to handle that is with a string setting for allowed heads that is a bit arbitrary, and where you really have to, it's a do the right thing kind of thing. And if you want to be sure that it's really, really doing the right thing, you write out the head explicitly.
Yeah, that's what I've been saying all along with those allowed heads. We need a string that means everything that kind of represents a list.
Right, which is its list or sparse array or structured array.
Right, or list representation, for example, or some simple name.
Right, and I wasn't suggesting that as the name. I was suggesting that as the
right. But I think that, for example, if we have infinite lists or cyclic lists, or for example, is an association list-like enough to be something that you want to do whatever you're doing to, or not? See, I think it's a slippery slope. I think there isn't a bright line here. And that's why I think it should be handled. I think we are going to need a sort of a calculus of these dividing lines between, is it a warning, is it an error? Is it a list-like thing, is it not a list-like thing? In other words, it's like
we have a pretty bright line about list-like, right? Is it a list representation or not? And we even have a function, developer backtick list representation.
Okay,
for that.
I didn't know that. But okay, is that a data list or could that be a symbolic wrapper list? So for example, let's imagine that we introduce a thing one day called infinite list, or symbolic list. Is that a list or is it not a list?
I think in principle it will not, because
right. It's certainly not an array.
Right.
It's certainly not array queue.
Yeah, it's not array
queue. It cannot be used with list itself.
Well, I wonder about that. It can be used with list operations like part extraction, take, things like that.
Yes, but what would normal of that be? It cannot give a list.
If it's an infinite list.
Right.
Well, yes, that's true, unfortunately, in the current universe.
That's our basic idea here, that the structured arrays and like sparse arrays under normal lists.
But so you're giving a criterion. This is, you are exactly making my point, okay? You are giving a criterion that is, can it be normalized to a regular list, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
That is a criterion, but it is not the only criterion. Another criterion that for some other purpose I might want is, can I do part extraction on it? Or can I compute its,
which is actually what dimensions and array depth currently do, right? I mean, this is why array depth is of sign of 1 is 2.
That's crazy and weird.
Or I guess 1 rather than 0, right? Which is why we need.
Why does it do that? Because it's looking at their head.
Right, because the top level head can be arbitrary. The default setting of allowed heads is essentially inherited, other than the fact that list can be sort of.
Okay, listen, I strongly think the right answer to this is it should be part of our project of making these bucketing things, errors versus warnings, list-like versus not very list-like. There's a whole bunch of these distinctions that, I mean, it's an interesting thing. Okay, so let's muse on this for just a second, okay? We have a language that has very precise characteristics. We also have Wolfram Alpha, which is a pure do what I mean type system, right? This dividing line of like, is it an error or is it not an error? These are sort of meta language constructs. And I think we don't really have, I think this is sort of a new frontier, is how do we handle, how do we handle sort of the heuristics? I mean, okay, another place where we have this is in syntax coloring and code assistance. That's a sort of another place, but in that case, there's always a human in the loop. See, what's interesting here, yeah, I mean, what's interesting is in syntax coloring, there's a human right there in the loop. So whatever the machine does in its advisory capacity, the human gets to decide what to do. A warning or an error, for example, there isn't really a human in the loop because the machine is just going to run and do stuff. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, anyway, I don't know. Does anybody have any particular comments?
Well, I still have 2 comments that are one. I mean, we can't leave the structured array page as is because it's just wrong.
Okay, let's look at it.
And we,
well, we should clearly. What's wrong about it? It's just
everything, almost everything, right? I mean,
well, but all this stuff about symmetric. I mean, what happened to the asymmetric, cyclic? What happened to all these arrays with? I thought we had a whole calculus of Riemann tensors and things here.
You can add multiple symmetries there. Yeah, that argument accepts.
So what else?
But that's not a structured array. That's a symmetrized array, and the symmetrized array page is more or less fine.
Hey, I have a totally irrelevant question. I have a totally monumentally irrelevant question, and I apologize for asking it, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
All right, I'll prejudge you.
What's that?
I'll prejudge you.
Fine. If you look at square root of G, the volume element in general relativity, I'm asking this because I know there are people here who and you expand it. You look at G of x plus delta x, and you make that expansion in delta x. The first order term is a Ricci tensor, right? The next order term is some whole zoo of Riemann tensors. What is the systematic expansion of the nth term of that? I told you this was irrelevant, but I thought somebody here might know.
Not off the top of my head. I would have to think about that.
I mean, I've been looking it up, and it doesn't seem. It seems like people make a big deal out of computing the nth term, and it doesn't seem like there's a formal version of what it is.
I think this must be a property in some special coordinate systems, like normal coordinates. Because you can use arbitrary coordinates, I don't think that's a property that can hold in any coordinate system.
The what property?
Wait, really? Because, I mean, I was just going to ask, if it's really a Ricci tensor for the first derivative, or isn't it the Einstein tensor?
No, it's a Ricci tensor. It isn't traceless.
Okay.
I mean, the usual formula. I'll pull up for you on the screen.
Yeah.
This is actually a paper
it's
by
been-
Alfred Gray. If you remember him, he is unfortunately dead now, but he was has this big book on differential geometry with Mathematica. Fine fellow. He got introduced to our product because he won it in a raffle in 1988. Isn't that a bizarre thing? Anyway, he has this formula here. This is well, he's looking at the volume of a geodesic ball. This is his formula, which is the thing I probably most care about. That's the formula for the volume of a geodesic ball, and this thing here. Oh, what is that? That's the volume of the ball. That's the Ricci scalar.
Right. So you start off with, I think, Ricci scalar, and then
Right, but actually, I was looking at the thing where you're looking at the general expansion of, which is I think more this thing here. The general expansion as you go away from a single point. You've got this 1/6 of the Rij xixj, and then this whole zoo of horrible mess.
right. Although you're in the orthonormal.
Yeah, so that's a property in the orthonormal basis around the point.
And so what is your point? Your point is that with an arbitrary coordinate system, you're saying there's much less you can say?
Well, this formula is not going to hold. It will have terms that depend on the arbitrary choice of coordinates. But now,
what is the purely formal symbolic version of this thing? Independent of is there a coordinate independent version of this? You might say no, because the delta x is in coordinates.
right. But
Yep.
I think the argument is precisely the opposite. You fix a coordinate system which is particularly interesting, like this one, or normal coordinates or something like that, and then you can derive a formula which will have this type of expression. Now, the interesting thing here is that when you start taking derivatives of Riemann, there are many terms that will be related, and this is a standard problem in relativity. How do you make sure that two terms that are formed by products of derivatives of Riemanns are different or equal? And I have technology to handle this up to a certain order.
Okay, I may be a consumer this afternoon, actually, of that technology, trying to understand.
I think I can get up to 12 derivatives of the metric. So that's my limit.
Why is there any limit? I mean,
because this is a series that you construct, and it becomes combinatorially more and more difficult. So I just did it up to some order. I have like 500,000 relations.
Okay, all right, fine. So we came to the right place. Okay, well, I think that's some, yeah, fair enough. Yeah. Oh, this is a more formal looking expansion, not as big a mess. Well, anyway, okay, sorry, that was definitely off topic, but okay, I'm going to ask another question here, but no, this is even more off topic. Is anybody who remembers enough about renormalization group applied to I'm trying to compute a bunch of running masses and running coupling constants and make sure I actually get them right. Anybody remember that stuff well? I worked on it 40 years ago, but I haven't worked on it since. I don't think it's advanced.
The main thing I remember about that is that I had a homework assignment to compute the a 2-week homework assignment, which consisted of one problem, which was to compute the one loop renormalization in QED. So
yeah, that one I could probably even still do. No, I'm interested in just that. I mean, there are renormalization group equations that depend on group weights and things, and depend on a bunch of stuff, and I just wanted to. I've been horrified. Because I've been relooking at particle physics. Obviously, I last did particle physics long before the web existed, and I've been a little bit upset to find out two things about it. Number one, that there's much less about it than you would expect on the web, and number two, that random things that I made up when I did particle physics have wound up becoming standard things though without any attribution, but that was long lost by towers of review papers and things. But standard, utterly arbitrary choices of things, I believe are traced to random things I did long ago. And both of these things I find quite shocking. I mean, that there's so little about it comparatively when it seemed like it was the hottest field in the world. Anyway, it's a little disappointing to see that. Makes one wonder what. Yeah. Anyway, no matter. Okay. All right. Off topic, but okay. Back to structured array. So I mean, okay. What is happening to all of its "I want to be a Riemann tensor" stories?
Well, that's wait. That's not a generic structured array, because a quantity array is a structured array, right? It's
But so
and you can see how that right. We haven't reevaluated the examples on that one, right? That has head structured array. If you reevaluate that input, you'll now see the head symmetrized array, which is also true in the full form. And I mean, if you want to see our unfinished other structured arrays, I think it's a structured array backtick dollar structured arrays. Is that the symbol, Jose?
Dollar structured array heads.
Structured.
Oh boy. Well, there's a lot of. The Van der Waals matrix was in there.
Yeah. Clearly one of the earliest ones based on its context.
So what do you imagine is going to happen in the future?
So in the future, we'll have a block diagonal matrix and a matrix product and a permutation matrix, just like we have a quantity array and a symmetrized array. And, they will obey structured array head Q. And you'll be able to write code that, either treats all structured arrays the same, or, picks out a couple of them and then sends all the other guys to some generic path. Because, right, normally what you have is you have a few efficient algorithms for, one or two of these types, depending on the operation and the structure. And then everybody else, right, you need some generic code. Oh, all these other guys, just normalize them and use the generic slow path. Right, that's sort of the problem we need to solve. I mean, equally, right, we want to, when we all
right, so this is the old, so that's structured array new, which I think I had up here.
Right. Yeah, it's that notebook right there. You're just not at the top at the moment.
Oh, okay.
So a comment.
Yeah, that we probably shouldn't say transpose there, because it doesn't really work in transpose, but like array depth.
Look, we're not ready for this. I mean, basically what you're trying to do is to deprecate structured array. And
sorry, I have a comment here. Something which is important, in my opinion, is that Rob has created this great framework to add the new structured array types. And I have started using it for two cases that are a bit special. Symmetrized array is really a structured array, quantity array not so much, and data array not so much either. So I think with this change, what we gain is that we restore the symmetry with the other types of arrays, like sparse arrays and numeric arrays. And also something important is that as we add more of these types, it was becoming more difficult to do things for a given type of array, because they were all identified by the head structure array. So now users will be able to do something like underscore quantity array and do things on quantity array only. I think it's great. So to me, adding this new, changing the framework to look like this is a restoring.
It's a big win. Okay, so look, basically what's happening is we're deprecating structured array, And we need a mechanism, we want a mechanism to make list-like things that walk and talk as lists to be normalized, to be able to be asked for in normal. Those are the two known things that are happening right now.
Right.
Right.
So-
or in things like dimensions, you want to restrict to sort of all list-like things.
Fine. But I mean, so we need a mechanism to do that. And
Are you okay with so if we're going to add a string value to allowed heads, are you
go ahead.
are you okay with something like list arrays, or maybe that's putting it the wrong way? But,
Yeah, thinking.
Well, actually, your name, Stephen, is not terrible. I mean, you sort of characterize these as like data lists, right?
Yeah, data array. I don't know. That seems weird. Look, I think the string quotes arrays might be okay. I don't know.
No, but arrays already represents the
I know.
domain.
I know.
I like Rob's list representation. It's very specific about what
We actually have internal developer list representation. Is it developer or internal? Jose, I can never remember.
Developer.
Yeah.
I don't know whether I'd understand if it said allowed heads arrow list representation. That seems very weird to me. It's like mixing parts of speech.
Yeah.
Well, what is it? List convertible? Allowed heads are things which are convertible to lists. That makes me think of a car with its roof down. Well, we could go a little bit more whimsical, and we could say list-like.
Yeah, I was actually thinking list-like myself.
Somebody's going to read that as list-licky.
Oh, dear me.
Maybe it has to be.
We probably should yeah, I was going to say we probably want to.
I think that's the least crazy. I think that's the one where if people see it, they would know roughly what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Well,
okay, listen. What I think we should do, I don't know whether we're going to do this for 12.1 or whether we're going to wait till later. We've got to deprecate structured array. I don't think we're completely ready to do that right now. I think it would be a mistake to rush that. But I think that's what we should plan to do.
Mm-hmm. Well, the thing is, we can't, I mean, for 12.1, we can't easily go back on the changes I made to not have like symmetrized array.
Well, that's good. I think those changes are great. But what's your point? Your point is
we kind of need to change the structured array documentation so it doesn't look like it did before. Why
don't we just make it say structured array is now obsolete and it's been spread out into its franchisees, so to speak.
Yeah.
Just put a stripe that just says structured array is now being covered by specific array types like symmetrized array.
Right. I mean, right. I mean, I still think it would be useful to have the structured array token, but maybe I'm in.
Not if we have this list-like thing.
I think we shouldn't do it. I think it's too slippery an eel.
Okay.
All right. So let's plan on a stripe here, and I mean some of this that's actually nonsense. Should be removed. I mean, will you ever get a structured array as output for anything?
No. You will get, if you, like I said, if you have a structured array that you saved in a previous version that has head structured array. So we could add a note saying that, for compatibility with legacy data, structured array of blah will evaluate to.
That's what I would do, and I would rip out all of this stuff here because it's all irrelevant, and then just put a stripe that says it's been obsoleted.
Okay.
Because I mean, none of its examples will work either. So I mean, it's just like a pointless thing.
Okay.
All right, I think it's good progress, but I think all right, fine.
And Rob, do you think you can easily add list like for?
Yes. Yes.
So yeah, so let's try to do that because right now I have to go through all these contortions on the allowed heads documentation about,
Right. Exactly. I think that'll make that all much easier.
Yes.
Yes, and I think I can do that fairly quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm going to skip the table generalization again. I think it's because I think there's things here we really need to look at.
Okay.
Random number generator. So this, okay.
Right.
Pages.
So I think this is good and it's working in the prototype build. I mean, I don't want you to defuturize it because I think we're too late in the game to be adding a completely new heads to.
Okay, fine.
But as long as you sign off on this, we can merge the pull request to master and then defuturize once 12.1 is actually frozen. Like the documentation is frozen is what I mean.
Yeah, it looks good to me.
Okay.
$random generator state.
Yeah.
Okay. Looks fine to me.
Okay.
Random real of an interval.
Right. So this is some user suggestion that I know somehow was passed around until it ended up in my queue. So I'm looking at it. I'm not sure. I'm not convinced it's a great suggestion. At least if all we're doing is basically instead of saying random real of list AB, you can say random real of interval of list AB. I mean, the user could just take the first of the interval and pass that in.
Well, it's not so trivial if there's a collection of intervals.
Exactly.
Right, exactly.
And I also
Interval can
and
have a
I don't know
collection.
how much work that would be for Rob and where we put that in the priority queue.
I mean, it shouldn't be hard. You just turn it into a random variant of a multidimensional uniform distribution.
Why is
You
it
can just take the total length, but then you have questions. What if the subintervals overlap?
Right. Do you
There's
do
weighting.
double measure there?
Right.
I see. So sorry,
Can't
ignore what I said.
overlap in a fully evaluated interval?
Yeah, interval correct set.
Yes.
So as far as an interval is concerned, it's only covering once.
Yeah.
So then all you're doing here is you take the total length of the interval, and you throw a random number in that, and then you divide it up into the interval.
Yeah. That'll work, but
seems straightforward. I don't think it's the highest priority thing in the world, but it seems like a nice little featurette. I think it's useful as a featurette. I mean, okay.
So does that work right now with random point?
Yeah.
Random point of a random interval. Maybe it does.
Of an interval 0, 1, 2, 3 or whatever.
But how do I do that? Is it a list?
It's a sequence of lists.
Huh.
What do you know? Let's try doing let's see if we do
All right, because that's a
300
region.
of this, yeah, and then we histogram it.
You're going to need to flatten it.
Yeah, okay, it's fairly convincing. All right, well, so that's how we should do it. We should just support random real, get random real to call random point in that case. Any objections?
No, that's okay.
Okay, great.
Okay. Somebody should put themselves on mute.
Okay, so this is someplace where, I mean, I think, I guess I don't disagree with the motivation, but I do disagree with some of the details. So, so this is a proposal of Constantine's, who is here should be here. Yes, he's here to speak for himself.
Yep, here.
But the right, the basic idea is right. The file name and sort of the range of bytes are disjoint from each other because of legacy and before we added format and things like that. So he's suggesting we support a new syntax. And I think we shouldn't.
Yeah, what's the issue? The issue is you want to hash only like the header of the file or something, so you want to range.
No, the issue is I want to hash several files.
Well, I mean that's one of the issues.
Yeah.
But in each file, you may want to hash, the first 10 bytes, the last 10 bytes, whatever.
Can you open generate file signature page?
In the built version?
Anyway, in documentation. The documentation. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I just want to extend the syntax to file hash.
Oh, so okay, well, I will argue that you did this wrong then.
Yeah, this looks
I didn't
wrong.
realize this was already...
No, it is correct except the second, I think.
But you support the singleton range here, the thing which you said shouldn't work is documented to work on this page.
Yeah, I missed the second part. So yeah, that's probably a bug. Yep.
Oh, wait. I'm sorry. All
right.
Hold on a second.
Open up the proposal, the section labeled proposal, and then you'll.
Okay. But range is presumably a number there, and file is
a range.
It's a take spec.
A span or list of two numbers.
Right. It's a take spec, so it could be 1. Right. It could be 10, -10, 300 through 500, etc.
Okay. Well, we've already crossed that bridge here by doing the ranges like that in generate file signature. I mean, I think this is a bit hokey, and personally, I would prefer to see them as a second argument in file in the file wrapper.
I don't know how I feel about that.
Yeah, not sure.
Seems to me to package it better than to just have it in an open list, so to speak.
Right. Right, but I mean, the file is supposed to just be sort of a semantic tag. This thing is a file. Now you're adding arguments to it, which might be sensible to some, but not others. I'm not sure that's really.
Well, you mean that there are operations that say like import, and if you've got a byte range specification in file, you might think that import would only import the range of bytes, which would be a reasonable thing to do. In other words,
which might or might not be a reasonable thing to do.
Yes, quite.
So
right, but file hashing is a sufficiently generic operation, you say, that you can always just deal with a range of bytes.
Right, because all it does is, arithmetic on bytes, or maybe sequences of bytes. But
I wish we had developed byte array a bit further, but anyway, okay. Okay, so what's the proposal here?
So the
proposal is to have a new syntax for file hash. And
which follows the syntax for generate file signature.
Yeah. And phase out the old one correctly by documenting it.
What is the format option? I see. So you're proposing then to move the format to the third argument. I mean, it is we can unambiguously do that, and then
it is already implemented. It works both ways. So yeah, we can do that.
I see. Seems okay to me.
Right. I mean, if you open the disagreement, which I guess Konstantin sort of now agrees with me, but I will point out a possible weakness of this is, right. So if you have a list which is a pair of file name and take spec, then you should get. So it's a little bit unstable, right? I mean, you should get.
Yeah, I just missed this particular.
So I don't understand what happened here. What happened? What's the difference between these two?
I took out one level of list.
Well, I can see that, but I mean, why does that make a difference? Isn't that just saying a single file with -1, with a single byte at the end, right?
It treats it as a list of file names, and so -1 is not a string.
So it can't be a file name.
Right.
So why don't we just, in that particular case, which is what you're proposing, support file comma range?
Yeah.
If that's an integer.
Yeah.
Or a take spec.
Yeah,
take spec in general. Yeah.
Yeah,
I just missed this case. Yep.
Let me ask a question. Does byte array have a take mechanism?
No, I would like to, but currently I don't think so.
So would it be take itself, or no? It has to be a byte array take, I would imagine.
Well, no.
Like we have string.
I mean, we've overwritten part, so I don't see why we. Are you sure that take doesn't work?
Not quite, not sure. It wasn't working before.
I think it works, but I'm not willing to stake my reputation on that.
It does.
Oh, it works. Mm-hmm.
So
I wonder whether that's documented anywhere. We should check.
Okay, we can hunt that down.
Huh. Okay. Good. All right. Fine. Seems okay to me.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So this is sort of a bit of a thorny issue with sort of a time-dependent history, But basically, is an empty list of keys? Empty list of rules or an empty list of associations.
What a can of worms.
You look up. So the present time lookup treats an empty list as an empty list of rules. Key drop and key take treat it as an empty list of associations, but until 11.3, key take actually treated it as an empty list of rules. So, and there's sort of good arguments in both directions. So you can.
So the rules case, it would give a null list. The list of associations.
No. In the rules case, it would give. Right. It would give an empty Well, key drop and key take would give empty associations, and lookup would give missing. Like.
Well, why does it? I'm sorry. How does that work? Key drop. You're saying, if I say key drop of A arrow 1, B arrow 2.
Oh, doesn't it auto? Yeah, it auto
associates.
Which kind of weird.
That's an odd thing to begin with. Okay, so then what you're saying is that does lookup do the same thing?
Well, lookup only returns the one value.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is the same thing as the strange situation that we had with nest while, where it has to return a nothing, so to speak. Right?
Yeah.
In the case where it didn't find it, what does it return?
Not really. I think this is more like the second argument of replace. When we have an empty list, is it a list of rules or an empty list of rules? Or in extract, when we have an empty list, it's an empty list,
yes,
meaning position, or an empty list of positions.
Yes, I understand.
Right, and if you open up the two argument sections, you'll see we make that point explicitly, right? So my second bullet point is if you treat it as rules, we're being consistent with replace. Whereas if we treat it as an empty list of associations, then we're being consistent with extract.
What do you mean an empty list of associations? You mean an empty association?
No, I mean an empty list of associations. So, right, because you can give look at the right, you can. Right. So right now, right. So if it were treated as an empty list of associations, it would give an empty list because it would look up the key from 0 things, and therefore it gives an empty list. Whereas right now it's giving you a missing because it's looking up the key from no rules and therefore not finding.
I get it. I get the issue.
And this is not the first time this has come up. There was maybe we should have linked to it, but there was a thread that maybe a year and a half ago on L-kernel.
Okay, so here's my test. Let's imagine pieces of code that have sort of edge cases that are these things. Let's see what they look like. Okay. I think that's what we have to think about. And then how do they recover? What is their error recovery? In other words, if it's a lookup, I think it's what we have to do. I mean, I'm going to guess that this is a reasonable thing to do for lookup, because I'm going to guess that is, people are using it as an El Cheapo association or a duplicate entry association.
Right. I mean, I think I guess I shouldn't. Haven't sort of written this down, but yes, making a change. I certainly don't think we're going to make the change for 12.1 because God only knows what will break if we make this change. Right? There's certainly right.
No, we absolutely cannot do that. Yeah.
And so.
Well, look, I suggest examining some code for where this comes up and how people put wrappers around lookup and key drop and so on to handle this case. I mean, clearly we could imagine an option in lookup for what to do with this case or something. I think it's what we have to do, because I don't think we can answer this in the abstract. I can see arguments both ways. Hey, we got a couple of questions on our live stream. We got one from Steve about for byte array. Often wish to have a convenient way in the suggestions bar to view the byte array as an encoded string. That's interesting. How would you view it as an encoded string?
I guess I'm not sure what he means as an encoded string. I mean,
well, I mean, we got a byte array, and the question is, how do you, I guess, as base 64? Base 64, actually saying base 58 or hex.
Okay. Right. So the
how would you actually do that? How would you view it as base 58? How would you view it as hex?
Well, that will be base encode of the byte array, comma 16. That probably works in the prototype build if you have the prototype build. But I can't guarantee that but there's an open pull request. I actually had a question about that, which I didn't think we'd get to, so I didn't put it here. But which is
that's an interesting problem. Yeah. The prototype build, that was fun. Okay, go ahead. Let's just try this. So byte array range of 100, base encode.
Okay, so I guess it's not actually in the prototype build, but that will be working in 12.2. The main question is about.
Okay, but I'm sorry, but looping back to the suggestion. So the point that Steve on the live stream is making is that it will be good in the suggestions bar when you get out a byte array answer like a hex string, like a a crypto key, that one of the suggestions in the suggestions bar be this base encode thing.
Mm-hmm.
Seems eminently reasonable to me. How do we note down that suggestion to make sure it gets acted on once we have base encode?
I think it should be sent to me if somebody takes and creates a ticket or something.
Okay. Also, Mohammed on the live stream is asking about, please add support for all and span in extract. Why isn't all supported in extract? I thought it would be.
It's not. It's on the to-do list. So that's what we can say about it.
Is it hard?
Yes.
Are there complicated cases?
Yes. I mean, we've been through all of this. You've forgotten, but we have a design, and now it's just waiting, I guess, on Constantine to implement it, but maybe.
Constantine, were you even aware of that?
Yeah, it's been in my list, but I'll reprioritize it.
Well, nice.
My comment on this is use part instead. It's a more effective function anyway.
Well, that's not a reasonable thing to say. They should both be full-featured. I mean, they're both useful in their own way. There's another question from Mohammed. Let's see. When trying to manage, he says it's off topic, but let's look at it anyway. When trying to manage email accounts from language, the server has to allow less secure app access. What the heck is that?
I presume it's the TLS version or something, but.
Well, is it for using Mail Connect or is it for doing something else? Trying to manage.
I'm not sure. I think this is the wrong set of people to. Ask
again when it seems like the right set of people, and be more specific in what you're asking, I think, because we don't quite understand.
Yeah, so Stephen, about base encode, right? So actually, I mean, it's still not in the prototype build, but I realized we actually called it base 16, base 64, and base 85. In the second argument. The second argument isn't just the integer 16.
I see. Good. Okay, fine.
But there was a question about that because I did notice the thing we call base 85 is commonly called ASCII 85. And then the thing that the people who make the distinction between the two base 85s call a different standard, which is the Z modem standard. There's a blast from the past. We call that base 85. So I'm wondering if we should call it ASCII 85 rather than base 85.
How about base 85 ASCII?
Base 85 ASCII and then base 85 Z modem.
Are we seriously going to put Z modem in there?
All right. Well, we'll have to come up with something else for it, but. Okay, but
what is the description? I mean, right. I think that's the right thing to do. I mean, I don't remember what base 64 lines is.
I think I don't think we're going to have that one. I think that was sort of a way of having sort of a maximum length, right? So that
I see.
So you have.
Well, I don't know whether let's discuss it separately, but whether it should be base 85 ASCII or I think that makes more sense. If they're both base 85, then let's qualify them.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than and not have one that's just called base 85, probably, because that's a formula for people getting confused.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Carl is asking, it would be nice to allow other integer bases for base encode. Yes, the reason for not allowing it is that it's completely undefined. I mean, these things are just totally random. They pick out random ASCII characters and things to use to represent bigger numbers. Is that not correct?
Yes.
I mean, they're purely conventional.
Yes, and each with except for 16, which pretty much everybody agrees. Although even there are sort of edge cases of like, do you allow both uppercase and lowercase or only uppercase and things like that. So
Right.
there are in fact distinctions even there. But except for base 16, where pretty much everybody agrees on everything, all the other integer bases, there are sort of different alphabets and different conventions about various things. So
Okay, so Steve on our live stream is commenting on his use case for the base encoding stuff is that he demonstrates our crypto stuff, which he says very compelling and easy demo. Good, we agree. But he says it's a snag because he gets to byte arrays and there's a long gyration to show the key in human readable form. It's an interesting problem. The right. I mean, we figured that the key, it's one of these cases where who would ever want to see the key? Isn't there a way of converting it into a string? How do you convert a byte array into a? That's what this is. That's.
Well, no. I mean, I think what he really wants is normal of the byte array / base form. Base form of normal of the byte array 16, right? So that.
Yeah, I understand. With that and base form 16.
Yeah, and probably 2, so that you comma 2 after the 16, so that you get the.
Well, that doesn't seem to be right. Does it even accept that? I don't think that would be integer digits.
Oh, right.
And that will give you yet something different.
Yeah.
So yes, it is a gyration, right?
Yep.
I was saying, why not just allow an alphabet to be given in base encode, which is a reasonable thing. Of just saying what to do with each. I mean, that is a perfectly reasonable thing to just say, given this number, this is what you should do.
I still.
Still not completely.
I'm not sure that's actually well defined. I mean, I'd have to think about it, but off the top of my head, that does not seem well defined.
Right. All right, we should wrap here. Yeah. Hey, Jose, are you around later? I might need to ask some Riemann tensor questions.
Yes, sir. Yes, no problem.
Okay. I don't think I'm going to need. How many Riemann tensors did you say you could get up to?
The database has all relations for up to 12 derivatives of the metric, and because the Riemann is 2 derivatives of the metric, that means, for example, products of 6 Riemanns or 10 derivatives of a single Riemann.
Okay, if we get to needing that, I will be very pleased. Okay. All right, sounds good, guys. Thanks to folks on the live stream. We are almost up to 500 hours of live streaming here. And we're trying to figure out how we should hit that maybe tomorrow. We'd like suggestions for how to celebrate our 500 hours of live streaming. Maybe we should do I don't know what we could do. If you've got suggestions, please make them. Okay, great. Thanks a lot, guys. Thanks to folks on the live stream too. Okay, bye.